I'm lucky enough to live in a part of the world that's got really nice weather all year round. So I can shoot a lot of my portraits outside in my outdoor studio. But I'm not much of an available light shooter. Instead, I choose to bring my studio strobes outside and add light modifiers and light shapers to sculpt the light the way I want to for my portraits. It's just the way I work. Well, that means I need to get rid of the available light by using a neutral density filter, right? No big deal. Well, when it's cloudy, I only need 2 stops worth of compensation. And when it's sunny, I need from 4 to 5 stops worth of compensation. So to do that, most photographers will just go with a variable neutral density filter, and I'm certainly one of those. Well, you think when you spend $200 to $500 on one of these guys, you should be able just to open the package, set it to 4 stops, stick it on your lens, and go get a great shot, right? Well, no. The little dots along the ring of the VNDs aren't associated with any sort of exposure calibration. The manufacturers just want you to test it or check it or, I don't know, maybe guess and shoot raw. I'm not that way. I'm very precise with the way I shoot things. I want the camera to produce the best file possible. Well, wait a minute. What if you spend the money and go with PolarPro? They're the only brand that I know of that has f-stops on the ring to allow you to literally open the package and set it to 4 stops and go, right? Well, wait a minute. When you set it to 4 stops, is it really 4 stops? Is it 4.0 stops? Plus, it's a neutral density filter, so is it really neutral? Does it have any color shift or contrast shift? Well, no, all neutral density filters have color shift, sharpness issues. You probably have seen my first video on neutral density filters. It'll tell you a little more about that. But what we need to do is to figure out a way that we can take any one of these VNDs, calibrate it so that you know when you go out on a shoot and you need 3 stops worth of exposure comp, you need to be able to go into your camera bag, pull out your VND, set it to a spot, put it on the lens, and know you've got exactly 3 stops worth of compensation, right? Right. That's exactly what we're going to do. The goal is we want a new set of marks along the ring of your VND. So when you need a 2-stop exposure comp, you know where to set it to get 2 stops. And when you need a 4-stop, you know where to set it to get 4. But not quite 4, 4.0 stops of compensation. We work in tenths of f-stops here, and that's because, well, primarily I'm allergic to Photoshop, but realistically, I want to be able to create photo and video files that need no post-processing when it comes to exposure and color issues, and that can easily be controlled in the camera. Let me show you the easy and accurate way to get your VND so you can set it and forget it when it comes to exposure and color problems. The first thing to do is to download the PDF of the worksheet that I've got for you. It's 2 pages and it's a checklist format, so it'll help you get all the tools that you're going to need that we're going to talk about here in just a second, and it'll guide you through the process of doing the measurements and the calculations that we need to get your VND marked perfectly. And we're going to need a target to photograph in order to make our calculations. I strongly recommend using a gray card. Now, you've seen me use in other videos the pop-up gray cards. No problem, you can use those. I also happen to have the high-end X-Rite gray cards because I'm into all that stuff. But for this video, I'm just going to use a cheapy eBay, like $15 gray card that works just fine. This one back here is 8.5 by 11 size, and it works just fine for this test. Speaking of gray cards, do you know the difference between a real photo gray card and like a gray sheet of paper? Well, a photo gray card has equal amounts of red, green, and blue in it. That's why it is gray. And it's supposed to be reflecting only 18% light. You'll hear a gray card referred to as 18% gray. That means that 100% light is going to strike that card, and only 18% of the red, green, and blue values are going to be reflected. Everything else is going to be absorbed by the card. Now, there is a difference between the cheapy gray cards and the more precise gray cards. And if you're going to do anything more advanced than what we're doing here, like if you need to, say, reproduce museum artworks, you're probably going to use the super high-end gray cards, and I would certainly recommend it. But for what we're doing here, a cheapy gray card's going to be just fine. You're also going to need an exposure meter that you trust. Now I'm going to use a couple of my rather new Sekonic meters for a bunch of reasons. One is they're incredibly accurate devices, more accurate than any VND will be. Plus, they're just super easy to use, but you're going to need to set, no matter which flash meter you use, you're going to need to set it to read out in 1/10 f-stop increments. So that means you'll see here f4 and 1/10, and we bump it up a little bit more. It's f4 and 2/10, f4 and 3/10, because we're going to calibrate within tenths of an f-stop. Now you'll see my big heavy-duty Sekonic meter underneath the gray card there, and in my hand I'm going to use a smaller one. Now either one of these are going to be fine and they're just as accurate. The big one happens to have a spot meter on it and the little one doesn't. That's one of the big differences between those two. But calibrate your flash meter using the face mask histogram from my face mask histogram video, right? If you're able to get a perfect JPEG exposure with your meter under the chin, great. If not, check out how the face mask histogram works and you'll be able to calibrate your meter accordingly. Now for your camera, any DSLR or medium format or mirrorless that you are happy with should work just fine. There are a couple settings we're going to need to deal with though. We're going to need to work in JPEG only mode, no RAW files. You're going to need to work in standard color, so no vivid color, no black and white, anything like that. Just stick with standard color. Also, you're going to need to find out where your dynamic range functions are set at. So if you're not comfortable with that, in the Fuji world, it's called D-range. In the Nikon world, it's active D-lighting. Look it up and set it to the standard setting. That also might be 100. If you're a Fuji user, set it to 100. Or, depending on your camera system, you might have to turn it off. But anyway, open up your instruction manual. Make sure that you don't have any dynamic range automation going on, because that will mess up your exposure calculations. Also, I would recommend using a non-zoom lens. I would use a prime lens in a focal length of, say, 40 millimeters to 100, 110 millimeters. I can't emphasize strong enough how important it is to have sturdy mounts or stands or tripods for this test. We're going to mount a light, we're going to mount a gray card, we're going to mount a meter, we're going to mount your camera. They can't move in the test. If you bump the light, you kind of gonna have to start all over again. So if you've got big old heavy stands somewhere in your back studio, grab those bad boys. I'm using a big C stand for this light. I've got nice air cushion stands for both my meter and my gray card, and my camera's gonna be mounted on a super sturdy carbon fiber tripod. Get the sturdiest stuff you've got. Now for lighting, we're going to use strobes. Now it is possible to use speed lights, but that's a very difficult way to go and I don't recommend it. It can be done, but that's more for super advanced photographers. Let's go ahead and use a studio strobe. You'll notice I don't have my fancy Elechrome set up here. I'm just going to use the more affordable FJ wireless system from Westcott today. And the light modifier that I'm going to use is going to be the hexagonal shaped, I believe it's called a fast box or fast switch box. Forgive me for not knowing what it is. Look, you can do this with an umbrella. It's difficult with a reflective umbrella. You can do it with a shoot-through umbrella, pretty easy, but this is much easier to get done if you're to use a soft box of some size. And you basically want a soft box that's at least twice the size of the gray card. If it's a lot bigger, that's probably okay. If it's smaller, that's probably going to be a problem. Just take a look at what I'm using here and use the tools that you have that are close to it. Makes sense. Now you will notice I'm going to trigger that strobe using a pocket wizard. There's a couple reasons for that, but the primary one is all of my Sekonic meters have pocket wizard transmitters built inside. So it just makes it easier for me to pop those strobes back there. Of course, I'll put a pocket wizard on the camera, but you'll notice in my hand or on the table here, I'll have the FJ wireless controller to control the power of that strobe. Next up, we're going to have to learn how to shoot a gray card correctly. There are a little few things attached to that you really need to know, and I'm glad I get to show them to you. We're all set up and ready to go. We'll start with the light mounted on a heavy C-stand. I've got my gray card mounted on a nice stand with a sturdy clamp so it's not going to move at all. I've got my big Sekonic meter mounted on a light stand just under the gray card. And you'll see for our test camera, we're going to use one of my oldie but goldies, a Lumix GH4. On the lens is a 42.5 kind of fast prime lens. That's a little wide for what I typically use, but it works great in this video. Plus, it shows you what you can do with affordable cameras, right? We don't need anything fancy. You'll notice that one thing we're doing is we've got the Lumisphere retracted on our meters. You want to know why? The little Lumisphere is designed to represent the 3D qualities of a face. And the way this light here wraps around my face is the same way that light wraps around this Lumisphere when it's extended. So it's going to be able to give me the information I need when I take the Lumisphere, I put it under the subject's chin because it's in the plane of the person's eyes, and I point it as accurately as I can into the lens, not into the light source. I still see there are photographers doing that. There's not one meter manufacturer that says to use the dome for portrait exposure and point it into the light source. Don't do it. It doesn't work that way. Now, when do we use the retracted Lumisphere? Well, when we have something that's flat. So when we're going to measure like gray cards or paintings or the surface of some sort of texture you need to photograph in a very technical environment, well, that's where we're just going to retract that Lumisphere and measure the light that's falling onto that flat object. So it's really simple, right? Anytime you're photographing something that's three-dimensional, use the Lumisphere out in the normal position. When you've got something that's flat, go ahead and retract that Lumisphere so it looks more flat than it does anything else. We need to have a very even illumination on the gray card so that if we measure any 2 points on that card, we'll see no difference greater than 1/10 of an f-stop. Now, when I do this test for me, I'll actually use the spot meter because that's a little more accurate and it's faster to do it. But most people aren't going to have a spot meter, plus they are a little tricky to use. Let's just use the basic flash meter. So today I'm working at ISO 1000. My shutter speed is 125th of a second, and our target aperture is going to be f4.0. So I'll set the camera to those settings. I'll set the meter for the same, right? ISO 1000, 125th of a second. Then we're going to make sure that we can meter this card, but you notice I've got a blue shirt on that's kind of bright? Yep. If I stand right here and I meter, guess what? There's light bouncing off my shirt onto here. Best thing, and I don't want to sound like I'm sort of some crazy technomaniac, but wear a black shirt, a black t-shirt. It's probably going to help you out a lot. I'm lucky because I have long arms, so I can just move out of the way, and let's see where we're at. I'm putting the meter against the gray card, and I'm pointing it right into the lens of the camera here. I'm measuring f4 and 2/10 up on this corner. Same thing, f4 and 2/10. Remember, we're looking for f4.0. Let's see what we've got on the other side of the card. f4 and 6/10. So that means we're overexposed on that side, which you would expect, right? It's closer to the light. To solve this problem, we're going to use a feathering technique. This is why it's best to use a light modifier that's got a little lip on the edge. So what we're going to do is when we've got more light on the close side and less light on the far side, we're just going to feather that light away from the card. What that does is that uses the edge of that softbox to start to flag off some of that light. So we'll probably have to boost the power up. Let's go back to our far corner. Oh, actually it's f4.0, so we're good there. Let's see the upper right corner. Same thing, f4.0. What do we got over on this side? Still f4 and 5. So we're at f4 on the right side, 4 and 5 over here. Not good enough. We need that to be no greater than f4 and 1/10. So we're going to feather it a little further away. And let's remeter. f2.8 and 8/10. That means I need to bring that power back up, which I can easily do on my transmitter here. This process can take some time, even for experienced old dogs like myself. But be picky. You want to make sure that there is no difference greater than 1/10 of an f-stop between any two spots on that card. f4.0, we are ready to go. Next step is to run a custom white balance. That will neutralize any sort of cast that we may have in the card or lens, whatever we're using. And we're good to go. So our card is lit at f4. Our camera is set for f4. we're going to photograph our reference card. Now I'll just hit the play button and you'll see that I've got the camera set to play the histogram. On this particular camera it isolates red, green, and blue, but you'll notice that the spikes are narrow because we've got even illumination on the card, and you'll notice that all those spikes are in the same spot, aren't they? That's because we did a custom white balance. So next we want to do is, now that we have our reference file, we want to use a little piece of blue painter's tape. You can also use that fancy green painter's tape, it's just a little pricey. And what we want to do is we want to put this tape on the right side of the histogram spikes. We want the left edge of the tape to be on the right edge of the histogram spikes. And we want no gap between the spikes and the edge of the tape. That's going to be our reference for how we're going to judge the rest of the histograms. So let's put the filter on. So we've got a gray card properly illuminated at f40. We've got a camera set to f40, but we just stuck a neutral density filter in between those two that's going to absorb 1 stop worth of light. We got to deal with that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to raise the power of this strobe until my meter reads f5, 6, and 0/10. And let's shoot another test shot. Let me hit the play button. You'll notice that we have a gap between our histogram spikes and our tape. That's telling me that we are underexposed. Now the histogram's going to move around with exposure. When the spikes go to the left, that means that it's underexposed. When the spikes are behind the tape or to the right, that means that they're overexposed. So this is telling me that we've got a little bit of an underexposure. That means that when we set this VND for a 1-stop compensation, it's not quite getting to 1 stop. It's a little bit under. So let's move on to 2 stops. I'm going to set this VND, I'm just going to guess where I think 2 stops is going to be, and I'm going to guess it's going to be on the 3rd dot. Now we need to increase the light on the card 2 stops of overexposure. So remember, our reference is f4 plus 2 stops is f8 and 0. I'm going to increase the power of that light so that my meter reads f80. There we are, f80. Let's take another picture and let's take a look at the spikes. Oh, the histogram is buried underneath the tape. That means we have an overexposure. So I need to adjust the VND so that I have a little less light coming in. So instead of the 3rd dot, I'm going to go to about the 3.5 dot mark. Take another picture, and there we go. You will notice too that our histogram no longer perfectly lines up, does it? Nope. That's because every VND, pretty much every filter you're going to put in front of your lens has a color shift. It can be a minute color shift or it could be a huge color shift. This is a very small color shift. If we were to custom white balance through this, we would negate that and it would be back to neutral. Next up, we're going to mark the ring on the VND so we know where our 2-stop comp is at. I'm just going to use a fine point Sharpie for now. Later on, we'll mark it with a scratch. But I do want to retest just to make sure that my calculations are correct. Okay, next up, we want to go to a 3-stop comp. That means I want to adjust the light so that my meter reflects a 3-stop overexposure, which means my meter's going to read f11.0. There we go, f11.0. I'm going to guess at where I think the 3-stop comp is on this. And we're going to take another picture. Pretty close. I've got a little bit of an underexposure. That means I need to let a little more light in. So I'm going to move the VND just a bump. And looks like we nailed it. Once again, I'm going to mark the VND. And let's move on to a 4-stop comp. I'm going to guess a 4-stop comp's going to be right about there. We're going to increase the light on our card to f16 and 0/10. Nailed it, f16 and 0. Here we go. There's a little bit of a gap. I'm going to open up this VND just a little more, take another picture. Got it. I'm going to now mark where my 4-stop comp is at. Next, let's test out the 5-stop comp of the filter. So I'm going to max this all the way out, all the way to the stop. And we're going to increase the power of our card so our meter reads f22 and 0/10. More advanced photographers will go a little more precision by opening up the files in Photoshop. The histogram in Photoshop is a little more precise than the one that's on the back of your camera, but it takes a lot longer to do it that way. To be honest with you, I've got great results testing all kinds of VNDs just by using the histogram on the back of the camera. Those of you that are familiar with me know that I've been testing high-end photo products for decades, for websites as well as for manufacturers as a paid consultant. Now, no one's paid me for any of this information here today. It's all been out of my pocket. But what do I recommend and why? And what do I put my money on? Heliopan. The Heliopan filters are really fabulous. They are wildly expensive, but they're a cinema brand that kind of branched into photo stores 20 years ago. And I've always been kind of a high-end filter at any high-end camera store. Now, really close to that is the Singh-Ray filters. They really are well designed. They're really well made. It's a super high quality product. It is very pricey still, but extremely worth the money. Really great product, and they have terrific customer service too. In the number 3 spot, I'm going to put the PolarPro brand. Now, I got to tell you, I was extremely skeptical when I saw the fancy box and the signature of a famous photographer, and I saw that big price tag. I saw that they were the first ones to put the f-stops on there. I'm thinking, this could be a pretty mediocre product. However, it's not. It is an excellent product. It is right up there at the top. It is not as accurate as you may think it is. So if you'd like to know where to set your VND from PolarPro to get a 4-stop comp, please email me and I'll be glad to send you this data sheet. It's very close, but it's not as spot on as, well, I would hope, but I'm kind of picky. It also has a color shift, which is nothing unusual, but they all are going to. Some a little, some a lot. Now, saving a little bit of money and still getting a very good filter is B+W. Really, their neutral densities and variable neutral densities are about $100 less, maybe $150 less than the big boy brands, and they are very good. You probably won't see much of a difference between a Heliopan, a Singh-Ray, and a B+W unless you're super critical. Now, what I'll tell you not to buy, the $20 to $35 pieces of garbage that you buy off eBay and Amazon, they make claims that are not true. A couple of them say that they go from 2 stops to 8 1/3 stops, right? ND 400. They don't get anywhere close. Their sharpness reduction is off the charts. It looks like a distortion filter. I don't understand how anybody can give it a positive review. There are some people on Amazon that say that it's really terrific. Listen, don't buy them. They're garbage. If you just need like a replacement filter cap, you could go ahead and use that, but don't shoot a picture through it because it's going to ruin your artworks. But where do you really need to spend? I'm super fussy with my image quality, so I will spend the extra money to get the big boy stuff. But I might suggest starting with the B+W, test it. If it doesn't work for you, send it back, and then either buy a better one, or I guess you could look for a lesser price one, but I don't know if I'd put it on my camera. I hope you enjoyed this video. There's plenty more on my YouTube channel. And if you have any questions or big problems, feel free to email me, okay? Thanks.